A Little Yuletide Murder, Chapter 7. My clock radio went off at 7 the next morning, as it always did. I kept it tuned to Kaboot Cove's only radio station, owned and operated by friends of mine, Peter and Roberta Walters. Pete did the morning show himself, weaving in interesting, often amusing tidbits of local news with pleasant music that reflected his own tastes and mine, mostly big band music and singers like Sinatra and Bennett, Mel Torme, and Ella Fitzgerald. But this morning I was awakened to the strains of Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas. I stayed in bed until the song ended. Pete came on with his deep, pleasant voice and said, "Good morning, Kaboot Coverage. This is your humble morning host reminding you that you have 23 shopping days until Christmas." That reality caused me to sit up straight. Christmas seemed to start earlier and earlier each year, usually right after Thanksgiving, but even earlier in some instances. I wasn't sure I liked that, but since there was nothing I could do about it, I didn't dwell upon it. I got up, put on slippers and robe, and went to the kitchen, where I turned on the tea kettle and retrieved from a bag a cinnamon bun I bought the day before at Charlene Sassy's bakery. As I waited for the water to boil, I looked out my window at the rear patio, covered by what I estimated to be 3 inches of snow. You get good at judging the depth of snow after living in Maine for a while. The 2 bird feeders I hung near the window were doing a landslide business, my little feathered friends fluttering about them in a feeding frenzy. The tea kettle's whistle interrupted my reverie. Armed with a steaming mug of tea and a cinnamon bun, I went to the living room and turned on the television. The Today Show was on. The guest was an economist forecasting how well merchants would do this holiday season. I wasn't interested in that, so I shut it off and returned to the kitchen for the more aesthetic show being put on by the birds. But as I watched them, thoughts of Jake Worther and what had occurred at his house last night took center stage. Judging from the way things had gone, my assumption was that Jake had been detained, at least overnight, in Mort Metzger for sale jail, which he was fond of referring to as his Motel 4. The humor undoubtedly lost on those forced to spend a night there. I also thought of Mary Welter. Poor thing, having to face what had become the town's apparent consensus that her husband had murdered Roy Brent. I desperately hoped it wasn't the case, that whoever shot Roy was a stranger passing through, a demented, vile individual who had no connection to Kaboot Cove. But I had to admit that Jake's sudden move towards his weapon caused me to wonder whether there might be some validity to the rumor that there was bad blood between them, and that he killed Roy because of it. The contemplation made me shudder. Our local newspaper was on the front steps. I brought it inside, made a second cup of tea, and read the paper from cover to cover. Originally, it had been a weekly, but the town had grown sufficiently to prompt its publisher to turn it into a daily paper, usually dominated by the news of births and deaths, local events, and the goings-on of various citizens, but with an expressive national and international section called from wire services to which the paper subscribed. Plans for the Christmas festival occurred 2 entire inside pages. Roy's murder took up most of the front page. The reporter had tried to interview Mort Metzger, but our sheriff had simply replied, "No comment." Good for him, I thought. What could he possibly say at this stage of the investigation? but a spokesman from county law enforcement was willing to speak at length. I recognized the picture of the officer that accompanied the article. He'd been at Roy's barn when Mort and I arrived. There was a biography of Roy highlighting the fact that he played Santa Claus for our annual Christmas festival for the past 15 years. A picture of him in his Santa costume was there, as well as a picture of his wife, Patricia. She too had declined to make a comment except to say that she was sad at her husband's death and hoped that whoever did it would be caught quickly. It was at the end of the article that speculation appeared about who might have killed Rory. The reporter mentioned that Robert Brent, son of the deceased, had volunteered to come to police headquarters to give a statement, and that Jake Walther had been detained for questioning, was being held in the town jail. That bothered me. It would do nothing but give credence to the rumor that he was the murderer. We're innocent until proved guilty in court of law, but that doesn't necessarily apply to the court of human frailty and misconception. I was tempted to try and reach Mort to get an update on what happened last night, but fought the temptation. It really wasn't my business, even though I'd been there when the incident with Walter had occurred. I showered and dressed. I had a 9 o'clock meeting scheduled with Cynthia Curtis to discuss how we might approach the reading of Christmas stories to the children of Kaboot Cove. She suggested the meeting when she left my house yesterday, and I agreed to it. She wanted Seth there too, but he declined, claiming he had a busy patient load that morning. It wasn't easy summoning enthusiasm for a meeting, which I assumed was a prevailing feeling of most people in town involved with the festival. Initially, learning of Roy's murder had put us all in shock. Now, 24 hours later, that shock had been replaced with a persuasive scene of gloom and depression. But I knew that I and anyone else couldn't let that dominate our lives. The festival was too important to have it ruined by any single event, no matter how tragic it might have been. Dimitri picked me up in his taxi at 10 of 9 and drove me to the library where Cynthia waited in her office. Good morning, Cynthia. Good morning, Jess. Glad you could make it. Frankly, I wondered whether you'd show up. I said I would. Because of what happened yesterday. I didn't want to get out of bed this morning. I was so depressed over it. I nodded. I know exactly what you mean. But I reminded myself that we have a festival to put on. It might be radicalization on my part, but I think Roy would have wanted us to go forward. I agree. I got a call from Jim Shivlin this morning. How is our mayor? I asked. Feeling pretty much the same as we do. He said he was going to meet with the festival committee at noon and suggest that the festival be officially dedicated to Roy's memory. That's a splendid idea. She got up to greet me. Now she settled behind her desk, went through some papers, saying as she did, at least having the murderer identified and under arrest might make things easier, provide some sort of closure. Pardon? She looked up. Didn't you hear? Hear what? That Jake Walther is being charged with the murder of Roy Brent. No, I did not hear that. What have you heard? She asked. I recounted what happened the night before, and the circumstances under which Jake had been brought to police headquarters. When I finished, I added, but Mark was simply going to question him. What happened? Did Jake confess to the murder? Cynthia shrugged and said, I really don't know. You read the paper this morning? Sure, but the article didn't indicate that Jake had been arrested, just that he had been detained for questioning. Mel says she got it from a good source that Jake is being accused of the murder. I laughed. The good old Kaboot Cove grapevine at work with Mary's luncheonette as its headquarters. Mind if I use your phone? Not at all. I dialed the number for police headquarters. Deputy Tom Coleman answered, asked me to hold, and a minute later, Mort came on the line. I was wondering when you'd get around to calling, he said. I wasn't going to. I didn't think it was my business. But I just heard that you're charging Jake Welter with Roy Brent's murder. When did you hear that? It came from, well, just a rumor floating around town. Damn kabuka rumor mill, he said. No, I had Tom drive Jake back to his house this morning. Kept him overnight and stayed up asking him questions. He admits he and Roy didn't get along. Maybe that's an understatement. But he swears he didn't kill him. Does he have an alibi? I asked. Claims he does. Says he spent the morning fixing the crumbling stone wall with his wife's brother, Dennis. Believe him? I asked. No reason not to, unless his alibi doesn't hold water. I was just about to go out to talk to Dennis when you called. Well, Mort, I'm glad the woman doesn't have any foundation in fact. I'm with Cynthia Curtis. We're talking about the children's story program for the festival. Sounds like a good thing to be doing. I think Doc is a little upset at not having it all to himself again this year. Oh, is he? I certainly don't want that to be the case. I'd rather bow out than hurt his feelings. Don't give it a second thought, Mrs. F. You know Seth gets himself riled up over stupid things. Got to run. With you later. I hung up and told Cynthia what the true situation was with Jake Welter. When I finished, he asked, What do you really think, Jess? You write about murders and have ended up solving some real ones. Too many real ones, I said. I don't know what I think. What I'm determined to do is to not come to any conclusion until Mort and other investigators do their job. I wish you could instill that philosophy in everyone else in town. Or maybe just expressing it to enough people will have that effect. Now let's get down to the business of the Children's Christmas Story Hour. Like, comment, and subscribe on this video. Bye.